The Memphis Grizzlies are the reigning kings of development when it comes to the National Basketball Association. Have you recently tweeted out something like, really? We're getting beat by Santi Aldama? John Conchar is dunking on us? Who the hell is that dude named Kenneth Lofton Jr.? He doesn't belong in the NBA. You would be mistaken on all three counts. And we're going to talk to you just how the Memphis Grizzlies have been developing their entire culture through this season as well on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Grizzlies, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Apple, literally everywhere you can get a podcast. You can also find us on YouTube. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all of those fun things that help make us part of your Memphis Grizzlies experience. And when I say us, we're back together. Me and Damichael, the dynamic duo, Damichael Cole with a commercial appeal. It's so good to see your handsome face once again. You have a soccer hoodie on tonight. That's very sharp. I like that. Good to be with you again, sir. How are you?
Man, I'm doing great. It's actually a soccer ball in it, but it's a shoe on top of, a head, because it's a sneaker head hoodie.
A sneaker head that enjoys playing soccer.
There we go, and he's kicking it. This is one of my guys' brand, this Steezy brand,
and he's kicking it.
Yeah,
I get it. A sneakerhead kicking it.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, you get it. So
I do very, very, very limited getting it, but without making it less cool for your friend, I do understand it. I understood that reference.
You understood it. You understood. That's all that matters, Joe. It keeps you young, right? Keeps you young.
Something that you and I both understand relatively well is the Memphis Grizzlies. You as the beat writer for the Commercial Appeal, me formerly of Grizzly Bear Blues, writing for SB Nation and Fansided and doing all sorts of things now, as well as hosting this wonderful podcast with you. The Grizzlies are the current reigning kings of development when it comes to growing their organization, especially from within. I don't know that you can really debate that when comparing it to any other franchise in the National Basketball Association. Because when you look, maybe you argue the Boston Celtics would have a thing to say about that with Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, Robert Williams, who's currently not playing. Those are all guys that were drafted and brought in to the Celtics system. So maybe Boston would disagree with my assessment. But the Memphis Grizzlies continue to show that they are able to take players and develop them and make them into a key piece of their machine, regardless of their draft position, regardless of how they came into the league. They are showing and shining out. And two examples of that to start with will work on the court, and then we'll go backwards off the court, Damichael, because I know you went to an event on Tuesday night that was a really good example of the Grizzlies investing in their culture off the court as well. But on the court as starters, a great measuring stick for how the Grizzlies are developing culture and players that are unheralded is John Conchar and Santi Aldama. I recently wrote a piece for SB Nation that talked about Western Conference contenders. And of course, the Memphis Grizzlies are a part of that conversation. And as part of my research for that, Damichael, I saw a really strong performance from the starting lineups, regardless of whether or not Conchar and Aldama were the ones that were starters. Conchar replacing Bane at this current moment. Before that, when Bane was healthy, it was Aldama filling in for Jaren. So I think that while we talk about how great Ja is and Steven Adams, obviously Jaren's having a massive start to his season, Defensive Player of the Year candidate potentially. I feel like we could take a moment to acknowledge how seamlessly Conchar and Aldama have fit into those spots. They're not as good as Jaren or Bane, but they are understanding of what their role is within the Grizzly scheme, and that is a key piece of development too.
It's a huge piece of development, and a big part of that, those two guys that you mentioned spent some time down in the G League, and we'll talk more about that development system over the course of this episode. But when you spend that time down in the G League, you're not just sitting on the bench, as we used to say, collecting, dust. And I mean, you're getting experience, you're getting playing time. I was talking to Kenny Chandler after the game, after the last game, and he was notified that he was being sit down, to the hustle to play, and in the game on Tuesday night, and his reaction was he was excited. You kind of think, man, Kenny Chandler, after he put up 8 points, 7 assists, 6 rebounds, now he's got to go down to the hustle. He probably doesn't want to go down there, but he was like, man, look, I want to play. That was his reaction. So these guys, they're buying in. They're trusting, the coaches. They're trusting the players. And the thing about the Grizzlies that's pretty much different than some other teams, you have examples. You have examples on the team of why this worked. For example, with a guy, like Kenny Chandler. Say, man, I'm a second round pick that got a guaranteed contract. Why do I got to go down, to the hustle? And then Santi Aldama can walk up to him and say, hey, that was me last season. Now I'm averaging, over 9 points per game as a starter, and he just scored, and he's keeping relatively the same stats off the bench. And then, Xavier Tillman can go up to him, say, hey, I did the same thing. And, Zaire Williams and so forth. I mean, a lot of these guys are buying into this development system. They're buying in to the culture that's being put in place. And, that's a big part of it. But, yeah, with the two guys that you mentioned in particular, John Conchar, Santi Aldama, the main thing that stands out to me about those two guys, Joe, how many times do you find yourself saying, why in the world would Santi Aldama take that shot? Or why in the world would John Conchar take that shot? They play their roles. Right. They're not out there doing too much. They're not out there. There's some guys who come in and they say, oh, this is my moment. This is my time to shine. I got to get these shots up. I got to prove that I deserve this spot.
And maybe that is part of the reason why guys like Grayson Allen and DeAnthony Melton are no longer in the organization. Or, did I say it? I said the name, didn't I? I wasn't supposed to. Sorry.
You got to watch it. That's
DeAnthony shall not be named.
That's DeAnthony Melton that just had 30 points and 7 assists.
Yes, but to play devil's advocate in an ironic way, because I'm usually one of the ones arguing for Melton, those performances were few and far between where the Grizzlies hope to go in the postseason, right? So in the regular season, Melton has always been a good basketball player, and I would argue he still is obviously a very good basketball player. But in Memphis, they are looking for guys that fill roles, and Melton was a bit of a shot seeker at times. And obviously Grayson Allen was as well, especially, when he felt like he was feeling it. So I think Conchar and Aldama are great examples of not necessarily doing that. And I also think that it's important to point out, while Conchar is not as good as Bane, he brings to the table something that Bane also brings to the table in terms of strong three-point shooting, right? Like, you have to respect Conchar as a shooter, not as much as Bane, but at least enough that Morant can still get the work done that he needs to get done. When Santi Aldama is in there instead of Jaren Jackson Jr., you still need to respect him as a rim protector. Not as much as Jaren Jackson Jr., but Aldama, the numbers back it up, your eyes back it up. He has the length and the understanding of positioning around the rim that he can make things complicated for scorers at the basket. Not as well as Jaren, but he can hold water. And you and I have talked all through this season. With all these injuries, they just have to stay afloat. And Aldama and Conchar, through buying into their roles, like you said, they are helping this team stay afloat even without two of their best players, Jackson, obviously, to start the season, and Bane now.
Yeah, and it's different examples with each guy, right? Conchar, undrafted, Santi, first round pick, albeit last pick of the first round, but two guys taking completely different, perspectives, to get in this situation. One guy had a guaranteed contract. One guy had to earn an extension, So at the end of the day, the Grizzlies, whatever the formula is, we got to figure out what that formula is, because there is a formula here in place where they say these are the type of guys we identify. Other than the cliche things, everyone says they want a guy, with great work ethic, who's going to play hard on both.
It's got that dog.
Yeah, all that. It's something else, Joe. It's something else deeper, But at the end of the day, they're hitting, and it goes even deeper. We're talking about, these two guys, but Joe, as you could attest, it's these rookies are kind of catching on as well.
They absolutely are. And we'll talk more about that in our next segment as we look. Again, we started with the Grizzlies starters and the organization at the top. The Grizzlies G League team is having some recent success, and they had a pretty strong showing on Tuesday night in terms of a lot of those guys that are towards the end of the Memphis rotation now being in that mix, helping where they can with the Memphis hustle. We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want, from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget. You can book an SUV, a minivan, something for a family road trip, a pickup truck for errands, or even test drive an EV. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. We're going to talk G League Development next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stay with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I'm Joe Mullinax, joined by my wonderful co-host, Damichael Cole. So happy to be back together. In the first segment, we talked about development helping at the top with the Grizzlies organization. John Conchar, Santi Aldama, two very strong examples of that. How are you going to let John Conchar beat you? Well, lots of people are letting that happen right now as we speak. How are you going to let the Memphis hustle and a third-year player that is being asked to play G League basketball beat you? That's the next part of this question, because somebody that you and I have been giving a hard time to, or at least me, I'll only speak for myself, somebody that we've been critical of, perhaps, is a fair way to put it, is Xavier Tillman. And Xavier Tillman, to his credit, a pro's pro, going down as a third-year player to be part of the G League conversation, had a monster game for the Memphis hustle, and that is a part of that cultural development. Those rookies, as you alluded to Michael in the first segment, they see that guy do that, and they say, this is how the Memphis Grizzlies do things. It's not a demotion. It's not a punishment. It's an opportunity to get better. That sounds like a lot of coach speak. I think these dudes actually believe it, and their actions in the Memphis Hustle G League game are a great example of why.
I saw a comment on Twitter. Hopefully the person who made the comment actually is listening to this, because it's pretty funny to me. We saw the G League Hustle release their starting lineup, and I think it was Kennedy Chandler at point guard on Tuesday, and it was Vince Williams at shooting guard, Jake LaRavia at small forward, Kenneth Lofton Jr. at power forward, and Xavier Tillman Sr. at center. And someone said, isn't this the Grizzlies lineup that started against the Heat? And, of course, Joe, of course that wasn't the lineup, but it's the fact that all five of those guys are guys you could realistically say you expect to make an impact for the Grizzlies at some point this season. That's what made, that pretty ironic. We've seen Kennedy Chandler, make his impacts. Vince Williams just got his first rotation minutes in that game against the Heat. Jake LaRavia, he started the season off blistering. The fans are clamoring for Kenneth Lofton Jr. and Xavier Tillman. We've seen him start games, over the past 3 seasons, let alone, talking about this season and in the postseason. So they got the win. It was a close one down there. But yeah, getting back to your point, think of a guy like Jake LaRavia, right? He comes up here, drafted by the Grizzlies. He comes out smoking from three-point range. I think through the first 10 or so games, at the highest three-point shooting percentage of any rookie in the NBA. And, he got sick. Talked to him in the locker room one day just about that, and he was telling me, he felt like he was really hitting his stride. I believe it was going into the Kings game, is what he said. Going into that game against the Kings, he was really hitting his stride. The flu symptoms and all that came up on him, and, it kind of derailed some things for him. So that happened, and then the foot injury, and it's like, the guy can't catch a break right now. And it's gotten to the point, I've seen some people say, oh, yeah, David Roddy is ahead of Jake LaRavia now. I wouldn't say that. I don't know what Joe thinks over there. I wouldn't say that just yet.
I like David Roddy, and I wouldn't say that.
He's been great defensively, and he's figuring it out on the offensive end too. But I think the thing is here, Joe, it's just, it's a situational thing. David Roddy has been the healthier player, and Jake LaRavia has been, in and out. And it was to the point, okay, he has to go, down to the hustle, to get some more consistent minutes and things like that. And that's why, when you send a first-round pick like that who has some success early, that can be disappointing. But then when he goes down to the hustle and he looks to his left and he sees Kenny Chandler, then he looks to his right and he sees Xavier Tillman, and he looks in front of him and he sees Kenneth Lofton Jr. and Vince Williams. It's not like you're getting sit down there and you're isolated and you're surrounded by a bunch of guys who, quite frankly, you just don't think are on your level.
And a major piece of that in terms of development, again, Zach Klineman is not dumb, as much as I enjoy critiquing how they haven't made a contender-esque move. He's a very smart man, right? And he understands that the bill is about to come due on a lot of these dudes, right? Even if they don't pay Dylan Brooks, max John Morant contract, almost max, if not max Desmond Bane contract, 6-figure contract for Jaren Jackson Jr. If those are your core guys, you're going to be like the Warriors and try to find ways to find contributors who don't make as much money. The G League is where they can grow these dudes, right? Where they can help them get game reps, where they can get them in their system, can get them experience, and perhaps even more important than experience, Damichael, confidence. Xavier Tillman, when I watch him play sometimes, and you see him up close, so maybe you have better insights into this, X definitely needs to develop his game, but sometimes he just looks like he doesn't have confidence. Like he could believe in his things that he does do well, especially defensively, and allow for that to feed into gaining steps and gaining opportunity in the spots where he's not as strong. So when he goes down to the G League and he dominates, I think you've talked about on a recent episode, when you get sent down to the G League, you're supposed to dominate. I heard somebody talk about that with James Wiseman when he was down for the Warriors. He wasn't dominating the G League, and that's concerning. So Xavier Tillman, third-year player, again, going into Summer League, wasn't a dominant player. I think that's what you were referencing with X in particular. And he dominated, right? Almost 30 points, 16 rebounds, just really was a 5 assists. And that's an area of his game that you and I have said we needed to see growth in, right? So He is creating for others. He is showing the ability to dominate at that level. And if you can dominate at the G League level, chances are you're an NBA player. And X showed that he has that capacity still, even in areas if we don't see him growing his skill set. He still has a strong enough skill set already that he's in a position to be that NBA guy when the Grizzlies need him in particular.
That was the perfect example. If you haven't seen the hustle highlights yet, I believe it was a 132 to 130 overtime win. Dakota Mathias put up 36 points. I think Vince Williams was solid as well, had 15 points. But Xavier Tillman, I thought, 29 points, 16 boards, 5 assists. Let me tell you, Joe pretty much hit on my thing with Xavier Tillman. And my thing has pretty much been the fact that, hey, you're in your third. He went down to the Summer League. He should have been more dominant. Should have been more forceful. A lot of those guys are first and second year players, and that's not what Xavier Tillman was. And I was kind of disappointed in that. And then, the season started, and, he didn't have regular rotation minutes when he did play. He was a big minus in a lot of those games. And it's like, man, he is fringe roster right now. But I tell you what, his last Grizzlies game against the Hawks, he had 8 points, 5 boards, 4 or 5 shooting from the field. He was forceful getting to the rim. I think he's a solid rebounder. He's a solid positional defender. He's the one center on this team who doesn't mind taking three-pointers. Hasn't made them, at a high clip yet. But between him, Brandon Clark, and Steven Adams, I've seen all 3 of those guys make three-pointers in practices. But only one of them, in my opinion, has not been afraid to chalk them up in games, and that's Xavier Tillman. So, I like the confidence in that area. And I think he has nice hands. He finished the ball really well, in these last couple games where you factor in the hustle game and you factor in, the game against the Hawks. And those are encouraging things. Like you said, I think overall skill set wise, this isn't a guy we're going to see doing turnaround fadeaways and things like that, at any point of his career. But Xavier Tillman is just the type of guy who can crave out a role, just off of his toughness, tenacity, rebounding, being more consistent with that three-point shot and the playmaking, right? Steven Adams, solid playmaker. Brandon Clark, I think, very underrated playmaker as well, even though you ask Zaire Williams, he can't throw an alley-oop. but very underrated playmaker as well. But Xavier Tillman, I wanted to see it a little bit more. Saw glimpses of it in summer league. Now you see him put up 5 assists, in the hustle game. Now he just has to stack those performances on, and then I wouldn't be so worried about his roster projection going forward on this team.
And that's a major positive for him. And again, he's going to be cost effective, right? And that has to continue to be something that's in the minds of the Grizzlies front office as they build this team. So we're talking development. First part of the show, we covered the idea of Santi Aldama, John Conchar helping the starters. Just got done talking about the G League guys and even some of those Grizzlies end of roster players going down and helping down in South Haven with the Memphis Hustle on their way to a big overtime win. When we come back, we are going to be talking community outreach, something that the Grit and Grind guys of Zach Randolph, Mike Conley, Mark Gasol, they did a great job in that area. The Grizzlies continue that work, and Damichael will talk to us about that in our next segment. But first, thank you so much for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen. For your next listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today. It's the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It is available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is also brought to you by betonline.net, which is your number one source for sports betting information, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds, trends, anything that you need in terms of gambling for professional and amateur leagues, from pro football to college bowl season, basketball, the World Cup. They've got it all at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those on Bet Online as well. They are the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet Online, where the game starts. Damichael here in our last part of our time together on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. I want to talk about, and I know you do as well, the community outreach aspect. The Grizzlies doing a lot, whether it's Steven Adams going to the zoo with a bunch of kids,
Yeah.
or the event that happened on Tuesday night with Memphis on an off day that I'll know you'll give us more details about here momentarily. What this team continues to understand is, in a city like Memphis, in a community, in a market like Memphis, obviously they're a professional team, right? They're supposed to win. That's what their goal is. But they also understand why they're in Memphis, and it's to try to make that city, that community, that greater metropolitan area a better place. And that's been, literally for the last 20 plus years that the Grizzlies have been there, that's been a focus. That work continues. And that is a part of development too, developing trust, developing a connection with the city that is genuine and organic.
It's fun for me to see, in a lot of ways, Joe. It's fun for everyone to see, but being from here and I was one of those kids who went on field trips and we'd come to the FedEx Forum and things like that, and we'd get Shane Battier posters and then we'd get the Pau Gasol posters or Stromile Swift poster and things like that, but it feels like after the pandemic happened, and this is the first time a lot of these players, not even just the rookies, we're talking second-year guys, third-year guys, and into a degree, fourth-year guys, like Ja, who, basically, towards the end of his first season is when, the pandemic shutdown happened. So you think of things like that, and they're getting to really, interact with the community more than they have over the past couple years. Special to see. I'm at this event and I was over there by one of the groups. One of the groups was there was Girls Inc. And this was I think the name of the event was Winter in Wonderland. So basically, kind of like a seasonal celebration, a holiday celebration event. All the Grizzlies players participated. I think it was fun, and I'll get back to my story, but just want to give some, background on what was going on here. You had players, basically in sections, right? I think John Morant was sitting down at a camera taking pictures, with kids. They came and sat down beside him and, had a little nice holiday background on the photos. David Roddy was face painting with the kids. You had kind of an arts and crafts section over there where, Jaren Jackson Jr. and Brandon Clark and a couple guys and Tyus Jones are making like gingerbread cookies and things like that. And then you had another section, the competitive section, of course. And Steven Adams was over there playing Jenga with the kids. Taylor Jenkins playing Uno. and playing other basketball games. You know, they're all spread out. And by the way, for my Uno fans out there, Taylor Jenkins said you cannot put a draw 2 on top of a draw 4. Just wanted to throw that out there.
What?
You cannot put a draw 2 on top of a draw 4.
Please. We're going to have to start a Locked On Uno podcast to have him on to debate that. That's ridiculous.
That's a ridiculous, Joe. I agree with him, Joe, but we'll discuss that. But basically, you know, just watching all the guys, I think we asked a couple of the players. I asked John Conchar. I think he asked Taylor Jenkins as well. Like, who's the biggest kid on the team? The answer won't surprise you, Joe. It won't surprise anyone who's been around the team. It's Jaren Jackson Jr. And I'm looking back there, and he's just this big 6'10", 6'11" goofball, like playing around with the kids. And I think one of the kids made a shot, and he gave him a gift. I won't say what the gift was, but he gave him a pretty nice gift that I would say a kid did not come to that event expecting to get. I will say that. So just watching them interact with these kids, and I remember one of the kids, you know, as we're standing over there by Ja Morant, he's sitting down behind the camera, and, you know, their kids are going up there one by one, sitting down beside him. And one of the kids kind of like grabs me on the hoodie, and it's like, I'm scared. Is that Ja Morant? I'm scared. And I'm like, go over there. You know, he won't bite. And the kid gets the picture, comes out, has the biggest smile on her face. And it's those little things, you know, like seeing these players interact with the community more than they have, you know, since pre-pandemic. And this is arguably one of the bigger periods of Grizzlies basketball we've ever seen. It's fun to watch. And it's also, you know, it's a cool thing as well, because it's always a good bonding tool for these players as well. I mean, John Conchar and Dylan Brooks were in the arts and crafts section making cookies, and they were asking the kids whose cookies are better. And John Conchar said he felt like his was better, but all the kids were choosing Dylan Brooks. So it's like those little bonding things, and it's fun to see. It's fun to be a part of, and, you know, just to get the witnesses as well.
It's what it's all about, right? Obviously, you want to have generational wealth and support your family, and it's professional basketball. I don't have illusions of grandeur there. But one of the things that brought me to the Memphis Grizzlies is how organic and genuine the connection to the city was back in 2012 when I became, or 2011, 2010. Goodness gracious, I'm getting old. Over a decade ago now, when I started following this team, it was in part because of, the flood. I remember the flooding in the Mississippi area there in 2011, and, how the city kind of rallied behind the team and the struggles and those sorts of things as they upset the Spurs and they pushed the Thunder. And, the Grizzlies have been a bedrock, have been a foundational piece in that city. And regardless of whether or not they want to be one, they are role models to all those kids and all those people in the city of Memphis. And it's nice when they get it. And it's nice when they understand that, and they don't try to play the big shot card or, don't do as I say, not as I do. These guys are not perfect. We're all flawed human beings, but they are understanding what their spot in place is, especially among the youth. And the Grizzlies, again, they're not dumb. And as a small market that is still relatively young in terms of the history of your franchise, you build generational fandom that way.
Yeah.
You're in it for the long haul here. You want that 4-year-old that sat on Ja Morant's lap or next to Ja to take a picture to bring their kid back in 30 years.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the point. Ja Morant, the second or the third, is playing for the Grizzlies. And you want the next generation to sit there and be part of that picture. So it all is intertwined and intermingled. And, sometimes the ends and the means are both good. And I think that just because it might be business based in some ways doesn't make it less important in terms of the development of those community ties.
Yeah. And that's been fun to see. I this year I've seen a few events. Now, we saw earlier this season, I think it was still in the preseason, right before the season started, the Grizzlies had a bowling event, and a lot of kids came out to that. And then, you mentioned, Steven Adams going out, to the zoo and that as well. And then a couple other things the guys have done individually. And then, this event as well. And, it's like you said, this is thing that the kids are going to remember, and it's important. but it's important to the players too. It's definitely fun seeing the players. I mean, I can't stress enough how much of a kid Jaren Jackson Jr. Like this is the perfect scene, for a guy like that, and just seeing the faces of the kids as soon as they get done taking the picture with Josh, as they're walking out of the little booth area, and they're just like with this big look of amazement on their eyes, and watching David Roddy do the face painting with the kids. It's what it's all about, Joe. And the thing about it is these kids will remember it, but the players will too. The players really just watching them. A lot of the guys that were there seemed like they really were enjoying themselves. I mean, Taylor Jenkins, if you saw him playing those games with those kids, you would have thought that there was some type of big incentive on the line. I mean, talking to him, I think he used the word intense. Of course, jokingly. I don't want anyone to think that Taylor Jenkins was out here, slamming his hand down on the table in front of a 6-year-old kid or something. But there was some intensity there. Same thing with the assistant coach, Darko Rajakovic. He was playing the games. The kid makes the shot on him. He makes the facial expression and things like that. So it's fun stuff. And we talk about these things because there is some correlation to on the court, right? These are your future, fans of the Grizzlies, for the long haul, right? These are your season ticket holders, in the future. You think about the biggest brands in basketball, I guarantee you, those 50, 60-year-old season ticket holders were kids going to those games. And that's how you develop that lifetime passion. When we talk about the Grizzlies, and I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but when we talk about the Grizzlies and the Tigers and the fandom, and a lot of people talk about the differences in the fan bases, right? That's been a conversation that's been years old here in Memphis. And the big difference from the fan base, and there are cultural differences as well, but the big difference, I think, is the fact that growing up here, I heard Memphis State stories in the barbershop my entire life. Oh, you remember with this guy, or Cedric Henderson, or Penny Hardaway, or this guy, that guy, this guy. You hear all these stories about Memphis State going all the way back to the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. The Grizzlies, you only hear stories pretty much in the 2000s. And as we get older, and that generation gets older, there's going to be more passion put behind this team. And that's why these type of things, there's a long game you're playing here, Joe.
Absolutely. And the Grizzlies, I have a feeling, the Memphis Tigers will always be special in that town, but there's definitely been a generational shift. And I have a feeling the barbershop will be filled of stories of Ja Morant here in the next 20 years or so as time goes on. We still need to get haircuts, Damichael. And I think that that'll continue to be something. I doubt there will be robot barbers in 2042. Thanks for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. For your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights that only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. The next time we're together, we'll have a game to preview, a big game. The Grizzlies not having a ton of signature wins so far this season.
Ooh.
Here's an opportunity.
Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying it's an opportunity. They've got one or two signature wins, but here's a chance for them to really kind of make a statement on a big stage to show that they are for real. They are a team that is an NBA Finals contender. I'm sure we'll talk about that. We'll have some practice insights from you here on our next episode, Damichael.
I can't wait for this game. This is look. If you tune in to Locked On Grizzlies on tomorrow, this is the game I've been waiting to talk about because it's so much. I'm just gonna say one thing. I'll say one thing right now.
Yeah,
schedule's been weak. Schedule's been weak. The Bucks with Giannis, with Middleton, with Drew Holiday, with Brooke Lopez protecting the paint, and Ja Morant being one of the top paint scorers in the NBA. Sign me up, Joe. I can't wait till we talk about this.
I think that maybe they looked ahead a little bit in terms of Ja's a little bit sore. Let's give him Monday off because Thursday's going to be a big one. I think you might be onto something there, Damichael. So I look forward to chatting about that with you on our next episode. Thank you so much for listening. However you take in Locked On Grizzlies on YouTube, wherever you get podcasts, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. like, review, comment, subscribe, all those sorts of things. We appreciate it all. Continue to give us feedback and continue to make us part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies experience. For Damichael, I'm Joe. Continue to lock in, Grizzlies fans. Until next time, this is Locked On Grizzlies.